Good evening.
How many are we?
We are now currently 20 attendees.
Yes, I am asking for the total number.
We are around 45, 50,
So,
45 to 50. Yes.
So 20 is a good number. We could start.
Yes. You can proceed, Doctor.
Okay. Anybody, any protocols for starting?
We have the president with us, CPA Paris Odhiambo. Then we have the deputy talking, Ali Chizoma, and other members included too. There is no actually a protocol. You can just start because right now we already have a quorum.
Okay. You're able to see my share?
Yes, we are.
Is it moving? Is it moving?
No, it's still on the first page. Yes, it's moving. You mean Zoom? It's zooming, yes.
It's moving now. Is it able to move now?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. My name is Momo. Sorry, I was not able to join to log in on Monday when you are scheduled to have the live session. I was on another physical class that had been rescheduled following the holiday that was set on Friday. So I will have about 1 hour to cover the remaining parts. I guess Mandaraka did policy. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'll do the remaining parts of this particular module, which is the history of development, strategic planning, and project. I will not be going through the slides that you have been interacting with. So I'll just have a brief outline on what I'll discuss. So I'll just be discussing each and every module based on the outline that I'm projecting. You'll allow me to put off the camera because of the speed of the internet. So I'll put off the camera and I'll proceed. So in case there's any interruption, somebody can take my number so that you could alert me because I'll be on the presentation mode. 0723.
That is fine.
0723 584 928. 0723 584 928. So in case of any interruption when I'm on the presentation, you can alert me on through a text. You can just send a text message. I'll be able to see it if there's any interruption. I'm hoping that there'll be none. So I'll build on what Mandara did. He covered policy and there are a bit of commonalities between the outline of policy planning and also the projects. So I'll start with the first part, which is the history of development planning, and I'll put the context in Kenya. I've been able to look at what you've been discussing based on the questions that I forwarded. And I think it's good for us to be able to interact with the content and that your colleagues have been able to post. I think there's one by James and one by, I think, Jacqueline, especially on the history. So I'll just put the context of our development, then look at where we are, what have been the milestones and challenges, what are the current plans, and probably what we should be looking ahead. So in terms of history, Kenya has had a lengthy history on development planning, right from the colonial times. During the pre-colonial period, we didn't quite really know what was the development, because the nature of the colonialism was to lead by divide and rule. So part of it was to hold information about government plans and government priorities. So there's very little information documented about the colonial period. But I think after independence, the founding fathers tried to orient the country towards capitalistic model of growth and development, while our neighbors in Tanzania tried the Ujiji Ujamaa, which was a socialist system. Of course, we know the conflicts that were in Uganda, and probably later in Rwanda and other neighboring countries. So for Kenyan purposes, for many years, Kenya has been the dominant economic superhouse within this East African region. But probably right now things are shifting a bit in favor of our neighbors, both Tanzania, Uganda, and to the north, Ethiopia. And probably this is part of what we need to be discussing in this particular topic. But after independence, the first documented economic plan was the Sessional Paper number 10 of 1965. This document is associated with the late former President Kibaki. I think that time he used to be either the executive director of KANU or he was serving in government. There was the late Obama Senior, who was a major critic in terms of the proposals and the document as we know it. And then the late Tom Mboya was a key proponent of this particular session of paper number 10 of 1965. And the main thing that was propagated within this particular document was that the country needed to find unique solutions to their unique challenges as at then. And the founding fathers had identified three priorities. They had identified issues of poverty, illiteracy, and diseases as the three main things that the government needed to focus on and prioritize for it to be able to realize development. So those three key points are important in this particular discussion, because we should be able to relate those three priorities that were in the founding documents, or that were in the minds of our founding fathers, and see how they relate with the current development priorities for us as a country. So the sessional paper number 10 of 1965 was a very central document in the Kenya's development trajectory. And this document is again of a lot of historical context, looking at the comparative to other countries that Kenya we commonly use to compare ourselves. There was the question of the linking that document to the Singapore model. I think those who remember, we are told that when Singapore got the independence in 1967, they came to benchmark in Kenya, and the founding president shared that particular document with them. And what was of interest to them was let the young African nation find unique solutions to their unique challenges. And what we know is that after that, Singapore probably just substituted with Kenya, with let Singapore find unique solutions to their unique challenges. I think 6 decades later, Singapore was able to grow and become a first world country, Kenya, we are still stuck within the third world, even though in terms of data we claim to be a middle-income country. So that historical context is very important, because I think in most of the discourses and discussions on in our public forums, we keep on referring to these Asian tigers. So it's very important for us to appreciate the fact that one of the Asian tigers actually derived from our own economic plan, or our own foundational development documents. Then in the 70s, I think after we got independence and the Kenyan administration took shape, we are told that there was a divergence between uh, salary growth between the executive part of government and then members of the legislature, where we know that after independence, most members of parliament used to be paid and enjoy similar benefits like the university lecturers and dons. And we are told that somewhere in those early years of development, the civil service was left behind while members of parliament used their legislative powers to increase their benefits. And the reason why this is of interest to us is because somewhere in mid 1970s there was a disquiet between the public service and the political class based on those disparities that had been created over time because of the legislative ability and power of members of parliament. And there was a commission, I think it's a famous commission that we keep on talking about. It was called the Ndengwa Commission, which was tasked with the responsibility of identifying a solution to the wage disparities between the civil service and the political class. And we know that the Ndengwa Commission gave the Ndengwa report, which is a famous report in the country. And probably why this is of interest to us for history of development planning is that around that same time, the government has adopted a policy where they were divesting from state corporations or state agencies and selling or disposing them to the private sector. So this period happened to have coincided with that commission. And when the commission finished their work, they recommended that if public officers could just declare their conflict of interest in the transactions they were involved in, then in theory they could be trusted to probably deal with the government or contract with the government. And as long as they declared the conflict of interest, the presumption of the commission was that in theory that should not have an impact on the development or outcomes of the country. But what we know is that it might have been a well-timed or well-planned scheme to dispose public institutions to private individuals. And if you look at the architecture of the Kenyan economy and the key players of the Kenyan economy, you might be able to be trace themselves to that period because they are the ones who are in government. Some left their public service and they bought some of these institutions and went into full-time business and they started trading with government. So the Ndengwa report is associated with probably having the document that created what we call today entrepreneurship or will and dealing with government, because the paper said in theory people could be trusted. But we know when you come to public institutions, especially where resources and power are involved, then you might not be able to, it won't be a good judgment to just assume that people will generally be trustworthy or trustable in this particular manner. So if you look at the main players in the economy at the moment, you might trace them to that period when they used to serve in government, and when the ones who held strategic positions in government, they ended up becoming some of the big beneficiaries and acquirers of most of these state agencies. Now, why this is of a lot of historical context is probably because some of the challenges that we experience into this date might be traced to that period, because the issues of corruption, entrepreneurship, conflict of interest were actually the subject of that commission. But they concluded that people could just be trusted without putting any legislative frameworks, without putting any challenge, any limits and barriers. And we know that many senior government officers quit service to be able to establish businesses in those areas where the government was disposing. Actually, many of them ended up buying those state agencies where probably government was disposing strategic national assets to insiders based on that requirement. Then as we moved towards the end of the 1970s, the economy was experiencing a bit of turbulence. The early and the mid 1970s, if you look at the economic data, our growth rate was extremely stable and very good. At some point, it was growing up to almost 70 something. And that was probably the best data that we have ever had. In fact, the highest growth rate ever registered in the history of the Kenyan economy was actually around that time, where probably many of the economy was doing well, the economy was restarting. But as we moved towards the end of the 70s, and especially after the NECO Commission, the government started experiencing serious challenges in cash flows, in public wage management, and all that. And in the early 70s, when they sought help and bailouts from the Bretton Woods institutions, what we call the IMF, the World Bank, these institutions started introducing conditionalities. And part of the conditionality that I introduced were the structural investment programs, where they introduced the concept of cost sharing. Those who were in school in probably around that period, the early 1980s, they could remember probably class 1, class 2, and probably class 3, they were not paying anything to access a basic education. But when the cost sharing component was introduced, then children started being asked for 10 shillings and for exams, 10 shillings for public RMBs, 10 shillings for this, all these manner of things. And it was the same case in other sectors. It was not just education, it was the same case within the health. People were required to pay cards through these structural investment programs. And then in the around 1982-83, we had the coup that affected the political environment in a very big way. And then during that time, the government started struggling seriously with the public wage management, and the Bretton Woods institutions had put SAPs as part of the conditions that they needed to implement for them to be able to access financing from these particular institutions. But as we moved towards the late 80s, specifically in 1986, the government came up with the economic management agenda for renewed growth. This document tried to connect or link planning with the budget process, because historically, while sometimes the Ministry of Planning and Department were in the same ministry, there were two departments of the same ministry, the kind of budgeting system and the kind of economic system that we had at that time, the budget was used to control and regulate prices. So the prices will be announced during budget day, and then consumers could hold products and services until the price adjusted if they were expecting a price increase, and only upload after the budget is read so that they could maximize on their profits. So the economic plan for renewed growth tried to address this gap where they wanted planning to be integrated to the budgeting system, so that what we plan for is what we budget for. And that document was a very good document, but it lacked a legal support for implementation or legal infrastructure for it to be able to be implemented. So, but also around the same time, there was a lot of political agitation for multi-party democracy. So there's not much that is documented about the achievements of that particular strategic plan or strategic intent and goal. But there are a few papers, I think, from Central Bank. If you check Central Bank staff, they have written a few research papers around what were the achievement for that particular period of time. But that political turmoil probably interfered a lot with the development and the achievement of the goals that had been envisioned at session of paper number 1 of 1986. Around the same time, the government had introduced what we are calling the district development level kind of planning and budgeting. And the government actually employed quite a number of officers who are called district development officers, the DDOs. I think currently most of them are the ones serving in the economy, in key economic dockets within the country, where they were supposed to coordinate development within the district level. And I think there used to be district level kind of committees where budgets and development programs for a particular district will be discussed, and then they will be prioritized around that framework. So the district development for rural, so the district-based or focus for being the focus point for development was introduced in the late 80s and early 90s, but that still did not provide a solution, and the government had to undertake, as the last part of the structural adjustment programs, they had to incur or undertake a very painful retrenchment exercise that was done. I think it should have been 1994 or 1995, and many public officers who were at the mid-level were retrenched. This is also a lot of historical significance for the country's development, because nobody had done retrenchment at that time, and nobody knew what the concept was. So it was used for political witch hunt, or people who are not necessarily connected with the administration of the day. Then the act or that particular law was used to punish them, where most of them became the victims of that retrenchment. But also there was something they were also offering. They were offering something they were calling the golden handshake. And what happened, most of the young professionals, people who had just joined service and they had a long, or they felt they had a long way, many of them actually accepted the golden handshake to exit service, and then they went out and started using their connection to do business with government, what we were calling, what we call technically as entrepreneurship, because they had access to government, and then they took the golden handshake, and then they started doing business with public institutions. So that period is of also a lot of historical context, because some of the challenges that we experience today are probably attributable to also that particular season and era. So as we moved to the late 90s, in 1989 to be specific, the World Bank did an impact evaluation on SAPs, because they were to be introduced in the early 80s. I think it should have been 81 or 82. And they tried to kind of do a study to assess how effective the structural adjustment programs were. And one of the notable things that they found was that the structural adjustment programs did more damage to poor countries than good, because of the access fee, because of the school fees that had been introduced, because of access to medical services, the card, and all that. Many poor families could no longer access education, basic education. They could no longer access public health through public facilities. They could no longer access many other services that they were expecting from the government. So that period, or that report found that the structural adjustment programs had done more damage than good, and they quietly decided to vacate on that particular policy. And then they started focusing on good governance. I think right now we talk about good governance, but good governance has its origin from there, where the Bretton Woods institution said, instead of going for cost sharing or this program that required the communities to contribute something, to access services, they found they started emphasizing on what they were calling institutional reforms. They said instead of giving these conditionalities on access services, which were doing exactly the opposite of what was intended, they say let's focus on the institutional reforms or structural reforms. And that eventually evolved into what we call good governance. Over the years, good governance has grown in bounds, and now it's a complete discipline on its own that is quite popular among uh, academia and even corporate management. So for this particular discussion, the corporate governance that we know today was came as a result of that. So in around 1996, this is when it was introduced. Yes, that's what I was saying that my screen is not moving. I'm still on the first slide. So there is no notes. I'm just speaking to the talking points. So these are my talking points. So I'm still on the first slide. So good governance, as we know it, came as a result of the focus on institutional reforms. But as we moved towards the end of the 1990s, we know there was changes in the political environment when the ruling party of independence was or defeated by the opposition in the in the 2002 elections, and then the NAC government came into office. Now, shortly before the NAC government came into office, within the public sector financial management, the government had introduced what we call medium-term expenditure framework, what we call the MTEF. This had been introduced around 1999, 2000, but it was still at the very early stages of development and advancement. And part of the thing that had been introduced within the MTEF framework was public participation in the budget making process and in the planning process. But this used to be done at the parliamentary level through conferences that used to be held within Nairobi. So as the Kimbaki or Kenya Kwanza and the NAC government came into office, they started or they initiated public sector-wide reforms that also had implications and impact within the public sector resource management and within planning. So the kind of reforms that were introduced, we started doing performance management. They started also doing rapid resort initiatives that we were calling the RRIs, and other initiatives that were supposed to manage performance and actually be able to track and document key achievements of the government. And this also affected the planning environment, because the first thing that the NAC government did was to do a 5-year strategic plan, which they called the economic recovery strategy for um, wealth creation, for employment and wealth creation. The minister for planning then is the current governor for Kisumu County, Professor Nyang'. So they came up with the economic recovery strategy, which was a 5-year plan that was supposed to run between 2003 and 2007. But also within that plan, they also provided for recasting of a long-term plan, the Vision 2030. So when we talk about the Vision 2030 being a 25-year economic blueprint, or a 30-year economic blueprint, this actually includes the 5-year of the economic recovery strategy. This is the most consequential economic document that probably has ever been done in the country, because if you look at the economic data, the development is the economic growth is at 2002 was negative 2%. And by 2007, the economy had grown by 7 point, I think it was around 7.1. This is the highest real growth that has ever been recorded in recent history after 1970s. So this plan was quite consequential, and it's out of that where the Vision 20 that was crafted. And key among the things that were included in this document was the performance management instruments. They also introduced the project monitoring evaluation components and monitoring evaluation units within government to be able to track and measure performance. And then, so Vision 2030 was the success of the economic recovery strategy plan, but actually part of the 30-year period that had been envisioned. And this becomes the most recent long-term plan that the country has ever developed. And this plan was supposed to be implemented in 5-year plans. So we were to do what we call medium-term plans. Right now, we are on MTP4 for 2023-2027, which should be the last MTP for this particular economic plan. I've seen, I think probably it's from Jacqueline. I think Jacqueline has proposed probably there's something ongoing to develop Vision 2050. Probably that information has not been widely popularized. But we expect as the end of the Vision 2030, the final is part of the last MTP4, Probably this will have been a good activity to recast the next plan, which is supposed to guide the country's development. Now, the MTPs have had different challenges. MTP 1 2008-2012, that was during the Kibaki era, it was well implemented. And I think there was a bit of consistency in terms of the Kibaki administration and the Vision 2030. However, when Kibaki left in 2013, the Kenyatta administration, when they came on board, their first 5 years, there was no clarity on what plan was, because MTP 2 was actually being launched in 2027, in 2017, a few months before the election. So for the 5-year period of the Kenyatta administration, first term of Kenyatta administration, there was actually no specific official document. MTP2 had not been approved, so it's still kept on operating like an informal document. But then as we moved towards the election of 2017, then they proposed what we were calling the Big Four, where they focused on manufacturing, universal healthcare, there was affordable housing, and I think the last one in the Big Four was manufacturing, where they targeted to achieve a 10%, so 15% contribution of GDP to manufacturing to GDP by the year 2022. Unfortunately, many of those targets have not been achieved. Some of them were actually backtrack on manufacturing. For example, under Vision 2030, the target for manufacturing was, by the time we get to 2030, which is almost now 6 years, manufacturing should have been contributing 25% of the GDP. In 2013, actually, we had achieved 13%. So actually, in the first 5 years of the Kenyatta administration, the contribution of manufacturing had actually declined from 13 to 9.2%, or when they were targeting the 15%. But even after that, by the time the Kenyatta administration left, manufacturing declined actually further to 7.6% of the GDP on its last year in office. In the last 2 years, manufacturing had kept on declining. I think now it's doing almost 7.2%. So as the Kenyatta Big Four came to an end and the elections were done in 2022, the current administration came up with bottom-up, what we call the BETTER. And we know the key pillars of BETTER. There's the agricultural transformation, digital transformation, affordable housing, universal healthcare, and all that. And now, what is of interest to me is if you look at the Big Four, the issues of manufacturing, the issues of universal healthcare, the issues of affordable housing, and you try to relate them with the three priorities at independence, the problem of illiteracy, health, and poverty. If you look at, for example, the current things, even within the bottom-up transformation, we look at agricultural transformation. When you look at the affordable housing scheme, these are actually components of poverty, because if people are not poor, then probably the country will have already been developed, these kind of indicators, and these deliverables will have been done. Now, we're still struggling with the manufacturing. The Big Four are targeted to achieve 15% by 2022. They did not. What happened, it actually was a decline. The current administration under BETTER, they have focused on micro, small, and medium enterprises. They have not exclusively stated about manufacturing, but they have talked about micro, small, and medium enterprises. And if you look at that subsector, now what we call illiteracy, what we call manufacturing, it's actually the sum total of the human capital, which means that the knowledge of the community being applied for value creation. That's what manufacturing is. So in actual sense, through this manufacturing contribution and the micro, small, and medium enterprise transformation that you're talking about, and even we're actually talking about problems of illiteracy. Of course, we can directly connect the problem of universal healthcare to diseases. So what I'm trying to say is that when you look at the priorities of the Kenyatta administration under the Big Four and the BETTER program under the 5 pillars, we are actually talking about the same three things that we had at independence. Of course, there will be the life quality of life will be much different. There will be a bit of disparities in terms of wealth distribution, where we have extremely rich people, but also we have extremely poor people. But when you look at the issues, actually the issues remain the same over these last 6 decades. And this is probably what we are speaking about now, the current priorities of the current government. Now, we have alluded to some of the key milestones that have been achieved, but when you look at the MTP4, the first chapter, they have been able, I think it's executive summary, they have been able to highlight what has been achieved under uh, the, the, the last almost 20 years of Vision 2030. And probably we have not achieved most of the indicators that have been targeted. If you look, most of the flagship projects, the very few of them have been completed. Well, many of them are still at different levels of developmental stage. Many have never been started. For example, we had talked about a resort city in Isiolo. That has not been able to be done. Concert City has been slow. There is some work that has been ongoing, but we still do not have the city. We just have now the headquarters and a bit of infrastructure that has been done there, but it has not yet come into a city as it were. We were supposed to have duty-free shops in Mombasa. Those things are not there. We were supposed to have the labs that was supposed to connect the port of Lamu and the southern Ethiopia, northern Sudan, South Sudan. The lab set is still ongoing, but it's still at different or low levels of development to what had been envisioned. So there has been a bit of challenges. There has been a bit of small achievements here and there, but overall, we can say we are still strong with the same issue that we were struggling with during that independence. So looking ahead, probably we need to take in lessons from the challenges that we have experienced. One of the things that is emerging is that when we do development plans aligned with the political administration of the day, then when the changes or when the political administrations change, then the new government comes up with new priorities, and you find a lot of resources that have been committed to certain projects are defunded, and sometimes they are left at the different stages of completion. For example, when you look at the affordable housing, the Kenyatta administration was doing quite a number of housing units. The current administration seems to have abandoned the housing units or projects that were ongoing, and then they have initiated their own. And then you're wondering why they're still doing the same thing. They are still in the same subsector. You'll be wondering why they abandoned the projects or the houses that were already under construction or started by the previous administration, and then they opted to start their own, yet they are still talking about affordable housing. So that tells us there's more than just building houses, so probably more than what we see in these projects, because for purpose of development and sustained development, there shouldn't be major interference with programs that were already ongoing. And this is what the long-term economic blueprints are supposed to do. You remember the 10 years of the Kibaki administration, especially after the launch of the Vision 2030, and even during the period of economic recovery strategy. If you check all the speeches that were being given by the president then, he was actually always alluding and speaking directly to the economic recovery strategy for world and employment creation and the Vision 2030. But when the Kenyatta administration came, you check the 10 years of Kenyatta, if he has ever mentioned Vision 2030, it is only maybe one or two speeches for that and that duration. But when he moved to Big Four, he started singing about Big Four. Now, if you check the current administration, President Ruto, very rarely has he ever talked about Vision 2030. They talk about the better. But even right now, the steam or the discussion around better has gone down, especially the post Gen Z wave. And this is probably one of the big challenges where we plan with the political class in mind, not with the long-term interest of the country in mind. And probably it would be good if we could start seeing development as something that is very long-term and start linking development with not with the administration of the government in office, but with the benefits and the outcomes and the programs and the priorities that they must pursue So for me, the proposal to have another long-term plan, if it can be bought and universally across country and the government, then that will be a very big plus in terms of improving our planning cycle. Of course, we are dealing with a lot of environmental, a lot of changes right now that are being mainstreamed within planning. We now have issues of climate change, issues of environment. We're talking about issues of circular growth, sustained growth. We're talking issues of sustainability. We are talking issues of affirmative actions, things like HIV/AIDS, minority groups like persons living with disability, women, young people. So all these things have become, and we have now the international, the SDGs, we have the regional, the Agenda 2063 for the AU, we have the East Africa. So all these emerging issues have become key components within the planning space. So while the basic issues remain the same, there have been a lot of changes in the planning environment, and probably this is what will shape our future growth. So this is what probably I'll need to say about the development planning. Now, quickly connected to the development planning module is the strategic plan. Strategic plans are part of the planning process, so they are not necessarily completely different plans. But I think the approach to strategic planning, we'll be doing 5-year plan, which qualifies actually to be a specific economic unit developmental plans, which needs to be aligned with the national plans. For example, if you're doing a strategic plan for the Kenya School of Government, it must also speak about the priorities of the government, which is the MTP4 and any other commitment that you've signed under the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the East African Community, and any other people that we work with. Now, ideally for strategic planning purposes, it takes more of the private business approach, and most strategic plan are 5-year plans where we help to ask four important questions of where we are now, where an organization takes an in-depth internal review and audit of itself to establish exactly where they are, and then they ask the second question, where do we want to be? And this is within the plan period. For example, I'm doing a 5-year plan. I'm asking myself, where do I want to be maybe in 2028 or 2029 after the end of the 5 years? So that is the second question. So where are we now? Where do we want to go? Then how will we get there? Here you identify the activities, programs, strategy that you need to undertake for you to be able to realize the outcome that you want. And then you ask yourself, how will we know that we have arrived? Or what will be the indicators that will show us we have achieved what we have set out to achieve? So these are the 4 basic questions that are very critical when you're doing a strategic plan. Then, of course, from strategic plan, we cast a 5-year vision and then a mission statement. The mission statement is normally drawn from your act of parliament or from the instrument that created you, whether it's an executive order or it's an act of parliament. So the mission statement is the one that defines your being, the reason why you exist. And in terms of doing a strategic plan, we first set or cut the mission statement before we do the vision statement. In terms of presentation, the vision statement appears first, but in terms of doing, we start with the mandate, which is the reason why you exist. And then after that, we cut the vision, and then we identify the strategic interventions, we identify the activities, then we provide for their budget and their projections when they are expected to be incurred, and then we introduce a monitoring evaluation plan. We introduce a matrix that is help us to track and monitor the activities and the thing that we are going to implement. And a strategic plan, I think, for during the Kibaki time, they were quite pronounced for all public institutions. In many public sector now, the strategic planning is largely happening at the SAGAs or the semi-autonomous and the commissions and other government delivery agencies. I'm not sure whether the ministries are still doing the 5-year plans, but we are also supposed to have the sector plans, which are 10-year plans. These are more of strategic plans but they take probably a bit of the developmental approach. So for the strategic plan, the main issue. So for the strategic plan, the main issues is you identify the mission and the vision. Then you identify the strategic objectives which are supposed to accompany the mission statement. Then you identify the strategies, which we call the strategic interventions. Then out of the strategic interventions, we identify the activities. And then we do a complete monitoring and evaluation or implementation plan that is able to show us how the vision, the mission, the objectives, the strategies, and the activities are linked and how they will deliver what we seek to achieve. So strategic planning has its origin in military. It's a military concept. Then it was introduced into business by famous contributors like Peter Drucker, Ingo Hansov, and others in the 1960s. In Kenya, we started doing strategic planning around 1995, 1996 as part of the governance component that were introduced in government. But in terms of the strategic planning discipline, it's a very whole discipline that was started in the 60s. So in Kenya, we were late by the time we were starting. We probably were behind by 3 decades or almost 4 decades. But it has been embraced widely, both in public sector and private sector. For quite some time during the Kibaki time, strategic plans used to be part of the RRIs that were being done. But the idea of strategic plan is the same idea of having the developmental plans for the country, where you identify what your priorities will be, and then you propose mechanisms and structures to implement the strategic plan. Typically, we say the taste of a good strategic plan is at the implementation stage. So when you draft a strategic plan, it sometimes may not matter how much you say, but how you implement it. So the taste, what we call the taste of a good strategic plan, is normally at the implementation. So even if you came up with a very good plan and you do not implement it well, then it just remains a piece of paper. So in government, currently, I think all public agencies were required to review their strategic plan and align them with the current better priorities. I think there were guidelines that had been issued when the Kenya Kwanza administration came into office. And I think most of the agencies have already updated and aligned their strategic plans with better and with the current MTP. So that's probably what I would say about strategic plans. They are normally majorly 5-year plans. At country level, 5 years is a short term, and that's why for the National Development Blueprint, we are calling them medium-term plans. The 5-year plans are medium-term plans. Here in theory, in management, strategic plans are long-term, which are 5-year plans. So in terms of country level, when you're looking at a country level, 5 years is a very short-term plan in time. That's why we call them medium-term. But in private sector, 5 years is a long term. So what we call medium term in private sector will be 2 to 3 years. Anything above from 5 and above is normally a long term plan. So there's a bit of a departure in terms of the time horizon when you're talking about strategic planning. Now, the final part that I'll be talking about is the project management. The project management borrows a bit of the context or some of the key attributes in policy making, especially when it comes to policy identification, problem analysis, problem identification. It is the same cycle that we go through when you're doing project management. Now, over the years, there's a lot of emphasis on project management. This is a concept that was introduced by the European Union back in the 90s. And the idea was they were concerned about development aid that were given to poor and developing countries, but sometimes they were feeling that this aid was not reaching the intended beneficiaries, and probably it was not there were no proper accountability from the agencies that were receiving this. So project management as a discipline came about by the need by the European Union to be able to better account for the resources that they were investing in poor and developing countries, but also to be able to achieve the intended outcome for the beneficiaries. So there was a feeling that there was a lot of mismatch between identification of priorities, implementation of project, and accountability of the resources that were being pumped to these countries. So there was a lot of discussion on how they could improve on that. And that's how the birth of project management was or came about. Over the years, it has evolved into a complete independent discipline. I think now you can do a degree, a master's in project management, and probably a PhD in project management. It has become a whole new field, actually one of the most popular field or area of demand in terms of skills and competences at the moment. But in terms of project management, there are five key things that or elements that are of interest here. There's the project identification. Project identification uses the same problem solving approach, which is probably you might have discussed within the policy. So the same way you go through a problem analysis to identify policy options and policy interventions is the same case. The projects identified, we do a problem analysis. The idea here is that projects should be built around the cause of the problem that you're seeing. So when you're seeing a problem, sometimes it's a manifestation of an underlying problem. So the project is not supposed to be responding to the manifestation of the problem, but it should be actually speaking to the what we call the problem itself. So projects are supposed to be identified and to respond to the problem. So project identification is a very critical stage in project management. Then the second part is what we call the project design. This is where now you start putting design works and work plans for purpose of turning the project idea into a reality. So this stage deals with a lot of design, what activities need to be done, what time it will be required to complete different activities, how the activities will be arranged or they'll be undertaken, whether they'll be undertaken in a series or they'll be undertaken in parallel. Some activities could be undertaken in parallel, others might have to be done in series. So that particular part of project design, which is the second component of project management, converts the idea of project into an action plan. And then that part is where we call now the implementation. Now, similar to policy, the taste of a good project is its implementation. So you can come up with a very good project, but you are not unable to implement it. And I think this is one of the challenges that part of Kenya and many of the other countries are experiencing. So project implementation is very critical, which is the third stage. It is the step at which now you translate the designs into their reality. There's a lot of logistical management coordination where you need to coordinate all the activities. You need to schedule and procure the materials that are required. You need to monitor the implementation and everything that does with execution of the project. Now, the reality of project is that most of the time they do not happen as they were done on paper. Sometimes the translation of a project from paper to reality is much more complicated than it was done in designs. Actually, most of the time, rarely do project work exactly as they were drawn. And this is a very critical stage in project management. In Kenya, we are told that we are one of the best designers, one of the best ideas, people generate some of the most good ideas in the world, but they benefit other countries other than ours purely because of the problem of implementation. So implementation is a very critical part in project management. The final part is where we end the project and then close any outstanding contracts. Project closure is as important as project contracting. Now, once you implement a project, there are two levels of project closure. The first level of project closure is where you bring to an end the activities of the project. This is the technical part of a project because we said in the design stage, you break the project down into activities that need to be done either in series or in parallel. So the first stage of project closure is to bring to an end the activities of the project, where the parties mutually agree that all the activities that had been set out to be done, they'll be done. Now, the second part of project closure is now closing the contractual agreements. So you already signed any contract with the client or the project beneficiary, then you come together and agree to formally close out those contracts and end all the activities and relieve every of the contracting parties of the obligations of the contract. Many times we end project and we forget to close the contracts. So any contract that is left open, they become potential areas of conflict and also potential areas of fraud. Because if, for example, a project has ended and you didn't end it formally, then the contractor still presumes you have a contractual obligations, and sometimes we've seen even them sue for interest on projects that were actually technically ended, but all it's because the contract were not closed. So those two levels are very important: the closure of the project activities, but also the closure of the contractual obligation. So for project management, what we normally call the exit meeting is very critical. The exit meeting is not really something technical. It can be just a short report for 1 page, but actually it is in that small report where you bring to an end all the contractual agreements and arrangements that you had ended into during the project implementation. Now, in between those four components is what we call the monitoring and evaluation. Now, monitoring and evaluation within the project cycle, it's done at all the different stages, whether it's at the identification, the design, the implementation, and the contract level. So M&E is an all-round. Again, M&E has evolved over the years, and right now it is actually growing to become a complete discipline where you can do specialized skills in project M&E at diploma level, and I think even the universities are now giving degrees in project monitoring evaluation. So project monitoring evaluation is normally placed at the center of the four steps, because you monitor at all the stages. Even at the identification, you do a form of monitoring to establish if you have really identified the right project. So M&E is a central part. It is done at all the stages of the project. Sometimes it depends on the complexity of the project. If it's a too complex project, the M&E might be a bit shorter. If it's a small study, M&E might be a bit longer. But M&E also has changed. We are no longer talking about monitor evaluation alone. Now we will hear people talk about MAL, which is monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning. So we recognize that in project management, lessons learned from previous project becomes extremely critical in subsequent projects. So we are not just doing monitoring evaluation. We are doing monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and lessons learned. Now, reporting has become important because of stakeholder interest. When you do a project and you have different stakeholders, they might not require all the same information. So reporting has become so important that we need to feed the right information to the right stakeholders. Even when you have a project, it's not all stakeholders want all the consolidated financial report of a particular project. If, for example, the project is being co-funded by other partners, they might only be interested with the component of funding that they themselves did, and they might not be interested with the contributions of the partners in that. So that's why reporting has become very important. But also we have with project management, we emphasize on experience, because in project management, experience is very critical. The more experience you involved or you have in doing certain projects, the more better and easier it is. But now we recognize that people do not have all the time to make all the mistakes they need to make to learn from them. In project management, learning has become extremely critical, where institutions and entities need to document their experience in doing projects, and out of that documented experience, then it might become very easy for somebody else to be able to access that information and learn from the lessons of the previous project management team, and then be able to better improve on their project management. So this is really the issues around project management. And project management, I said, some of the projects we do in public sector are extremely complex. We are doing projects that are worth 100 billion, and you can imagine how complicated some of these projects are. So sometimes when you're doing very complicated projects and you do not have the in-house capacity, and you're within the public sector, it's quite within government practices for us to be able to contract specialists, people who have experience in running such kind of complex projects. And that's why project management is becoming extremely critical. We can see we're losing a lot of resources in projects that are poorly implemented, in contracts that are not concluded, and sometimes where the people involved in project management are careless about documentation and evidence. So this is the really essence of project management. There are quite a lot of challenges. I talked about issues of implementation, poor implementation of projects, poor management of contracts, and actually failure to close out contracts when even when you disagree with contractors and suppliers. It's good to find an amicable way of clearly closing the contract so that they do not accrue penalties and fines. Of course, there are those mismanagement of projects and many others. So this is quite a rich area. So it is a whole discipline that is emerging, one of the current most popular disciplines. So I think those are the three modules. You've heard the slides. So mine was simply to summarize what we have. So it's so 7:05. I could take one or two comments, if any. So anybody who has comments or questions, we open the session for a quick plenary. If you have any question, you could or comment. You don't have to ask. You can also comment. And then Nora.
Why do I have a feeling like these development plans are political baits that are meant to woo the Kenyans or the voters to vote a certain government? The reason as to why I feel this is because at the onset of each and every new government, they come up with a different development plan. Instead of building on what the other government had started, they come with their own, they start a new plan instead of finishing whatever the other government had started. So to some extent, I feel from the time we started the Vision 2030, the government that came, they could not have started their big agenda for the better program. They could have started looking at what did the Vision 2030 achieve, and from there they further the development plan.
Thank you. I think it was Nora. Nora, your hand was up.
Sorry, my hand was not
Caroline. That's Caroline.
Maybe Caroline.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Mumu, I have no just a comment. Like I really enjoyed the class. It actually brought the perspectives that I learned from the modules now into like a practical examples that you're giving, and I think you made it so simple for me. And I believe that you have actually done the same for the rest of the team. I think it was well done, well executed. Your knowledge about the history of development planning and the project management, I think I must really commend you and thank you so much for impacting that very insightful knowledge to me, and I believe the rest of the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Caroline, was that Caroline or Nora? Caroline?
That was Caroline, because I typed my comment.
Yes.
On chat.
Okay. Nora, you had a question?
No, I was just saying it was a good presentation, and I've actually understood the history in development plans for the country.
Okay. Any other question or comment? I guess I can't see any hand. So probably just heard what Agnes, your question or comment?
So I think the whole idea of Vision 2030 was that each government was supposed to have it as their roadmap. So looking back at Uhuru's government, you could see the Big Four agenda was extrapolated. Most of them was extrapolated from the bigger one, which is the Vision 2030. And I think for this government, we are struggling because most of the time when they speak, the development agenda is quite on the background, and people don't really know if they have a very steady roadmap. We cannot link the development or see development and link it to any other vision that is there as a country.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. I think for Anne and Agnes, probably what probably in the context of planning for, and especially for country development, one of the key things is that we governments are creatures of political systems, regardless of whether it's a democracy or an autocracy or a kingdom. Governments are creatures of political systems, so you cannot completely divorce politics from development. But probably if we can draw lessons from other countries that have done it, especially the countries that we were at the same level, what we normally call the Asian tigers. And the Asian tigers are the Singapores of today, the South Korea, the Malaysia, the Taiwan that is very strongly coming up. And recently the China is one of the countries that has come up very strongly in the last 3 decades. Now you look at all these countries are built on long-term master plan. In fact, for all these countries, they operate with a 100-year master plan. And out of the 100 years, what they do is that they allow the political leaders to pick their priorities from the master plan, but they do not change the basic structure of the master plan. So you go to Singapore, you go to China, if you go to South Korea, it really doesn't matter so much who the president is or who the prime minister is, because they are normally guided and governed by the basic structure. And then they pick their priorities from that basic structure. So they are allowed a bit of some political leeway to identify priorities, but those priorities must be communicating and advancing the basic structure of the long-term plan. This is what Vision 2030 was supposed to do. It had crafted a basic structure of 30 years. And those of us who have interacted with Vision 2030, they were very clear and very specific flagship projects, which were clearly highlighted and mapped with physical locations. For example, if you go to the Rakanidi, there were dams that were needed to be done there. If you go to Isiolo, you see there was a city. If you go to Lamu, there were in places like Kisumu, Nakuru, there were the agro processing parks. So when you look at all these projects, they are very good and very strategic projects that could have easily been done by any of the successor president after Kibaki left. The problem with the Kenyatta administration was the first 5 years, they were completely silent on what plan was. And that's why I said the Kibaki administration actually or the Vision 2030 design, it created a leeway for the newly elected presidents to align their campaign instruments or their campaign manifestos with the MTPs, and that's why the MTPs are tied to the election cycles. Now the challenge comes when like in the Kenyatta case, the big four isolated only 4 elements, and those 4 elements were not linked to the flagship projects. So the big four, according to the interpretation, they started doing things that were completely within their interest, not doing the flagship projects. Yet there were very good flagship projects that they could have just adopted, and they will have probably had a lot of impact than the big infrastructure projects that probably were being done largely to advance. So while sometimes we say those big infrastructure projects are still part of the Vision 2030, but if you look at the flagship projects, they were very strategic in critical sectors of the economy, And actually, these are projects that will have been easily be done and had a lot of impact. So probably will not have struggled with the legacy of the Kenyatta administration. You look at the better, they are still talking about the same things, but they are not speaking about the basic structure document, which is the Vision 2030. So there's still quite a lot of things within all the better priorities. If you check Vision 2030 in the flagship project, you'll actually see all those things there. Now, the reason why it's good to stick to the basic structure is that the key outcomes that were being targeted, the economic growth of 10% from 2012 and sustained to 2025, there was political accountability, and then there was social inclusion. When you look at all those, or equality or equity, when you look at those four pillars, the moment you move a bit out of the basic structure, then those outcomes are lost. And that's what I'm saying. If you go to these economic tigers, it really doesn't matter who the president is. The president and the prime ministers are allowed some leeway to align their priorities with the basic structure of the development. And this is what for countries is. The truth is that a president can only be in office for 10 years, and 10 years for a country is a very short time. So if every president is allowed to come up with their priorities, we keep on pumping a lot of resources to those priorities, and as soon as they leave office, the next president abolishes and leaves all those investments. And that's what I'm saying. For example, we look at the Big Four agenda. The affordable housing scheme was part of their scheme, but the current administration is still doing affordable housing, but they have actually abandoned all the contracts that had been started by the Kenyatta administration, and then they have opted to sign their own contract. So you find the resources that had already been tied by the Kenyatta administration, in as much as they are contributing towards the same outcome, those projects have largely becoming kind of white elephant, and now they are starting their own. If the next president comes and he doesn't value the affordable housing, it means that the project that will be ongoing and probably the resources that have been contributed towards that will not be supported for sustainability. So there's nothing wrong with the political leaders aligning their manifesto with the basic document or the basic structure, but that acceptability and continuity of the basic long-term plan is what actually causes development. The interest here is that we need to contribute to sustainable development. You cannot contribute to sustainable development by focusing on 5-year election priorities. I think if we were to go to the flagship projects and see where they have been mapped and align the counties, because actually most of the long-term projects are within the counties, and many of them are actually being done around the regions. But when you go to those counties, they are not even interested in speaking about them. So I think there's a need to have a coordinated long-term approach. If we can now, I think it's time now we craft either a 50-year or a 70-year economic plan, and then probably we might now need to start putting legislative protections so that new successor government will be obligated to implement those strategic plans, even when they adapt themselves to their political interests. So there's nothing wrong with adapting manifestos, but I think what is important is to not lose the basic structure of long-term development. That's what builds a country. Thank you. I guess I will need to stop there unless there's any specific comment. I'll return it to the president. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sana Daktari. I'm grateful.
Conclude?
Yes, you can conclude, but before you conclude, let me just give my reviews. We actually thank you so much for that excellent presentation. This has really helped me personally understand this country more in depth than I had imagined. So the information provided was very relevant, and the quality of presentation has been so good and excellent. Other than that, we just hope that the members have absorbed, because there are so many reviews they are giving on the other side, and possibly we can meet in the other class. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll still meet you.
Yes.
Yes, I think I still have another question, but when you come back, I've written a book. You can look at it. I think
Okay.
when you come to campus, you'll be able to see copies. You can also buy and support me.
Sawa sawa. We have our pastor. He can close the session with a word of prayer. Mr. Kevin Ombok, Engineer Kevin.
Yes, here I am.
Okay, proceed,
Say
please.
thank you. So we shall pray. So God our Father, I thank you for this day. Thank you for the session we've had. It has been insightful, and may glory be unto your holy name. As we depart from this session, pray that you be with us, maybe together in hearts, and separated physical bodies. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 Okay,
Thank
you
you,
Amen.
guys.
Amen.
Enjoy your evening.
Amen.
And good night.
Amen.
Okay, enjoy your evening and see you next time.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.